Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Zhang Yixuan or Umy from National Taiwan University, and I studied pragmatics and also multimodal metaphor. I'm glad to be here in Brno at 2017 to have a speech with you. I will be talking about the coffee flavor. That is the expression when you have, or the feeling you have when you have a coffee. Okay. Start from my topic titled Taste Among Senses, Cross-perceptional expression of coffee flavor in Taiwan Mandarin. So my topic concerns with the expression of multimodal metaphor within human languages. But first we'll think about what is multimodal metaphor. The multimodal metaphor, according to Forceville 2006, stands for metaphors whose target and source domain are each represented mainly or particularly in different modes. That is to say that this metaphor renders a verbal cue from a language from one domain for the other domain. For example, it can be like in a written form, something. And some has argued actually not that multimodal metaphor is not only used in only a written form or like verbal form, but it can also be talked more cross-modally. That is like Marx implied that we can talk about this metaphor as an intersection of human perceptions when we talk about having a linguistic expression. To be more precise, when talking about cross-modality in language, it is actually a kind of subtype of multimodality that focus on the cueing of when we talk about the thing from the target domain in more than one perception simultaneously. So when you talk about like the flavor expression, you're actually talking about the feeling of taste, the feeling of smell, but actually you talk that in a verbal form. The function of using this, or like why we use this, is it actually captured the modal convergence and similarity from different perceptions. So the transformed conceptual structure and from the sensory perceptions we can understand the transformation from the different perception. We also have another word for this kind of phenomenon. It's called synesthetic or synesthesia, and actually more used in psychology, but actually in linguistics, when we talk about synesthetic metaphor or synesthetic, like later I'll talk about the simile, it is like the description of one kind of sense expressions by using word that normally describes to another perception. So now we can think firstly about how flavor really is. The flavor expression, as shown in scientific studies while we eating and drinking, there is an unavoidable cross-modality of smell and taste. The two senses that to be unified into one perception that is called flavor. However, there's a lack of focus on the cross-modality of sense between smell and taste when we talk about flavor in linguistic expression. Why is it like that? We can see from Brno 1997, he has mentioned that if we want to determine or name the quality of a smell, how we feel about a certain smell, we often use terms derived from other sensory systems. For example, we use how strong, or like how small. That is not, maybe it's more related to a visual description. Many words from smells belong as well as to taste, touch, hearing, or sight, like other perceptions. So these unlimited verbal expressiveness in this area have a purely biological or neurophysiological background, or is there more involved, or is there something related to the limited linguistic capability? Some said that there's no importance in the rich expression of smell in language because they are viewed as more primitive perceptions compared to other perceptions. But if we really want to elaborate the feeling of the smell, taste, flavor, maybe we will fail to explain its quality. So it said that this kind of feeling will be deodorized. Is that true? But on the other hand, Paradis and Yi-Hsuan have argued that the conceptual preference hierarchy is non-existent. That suggests that the integrated word form directly reflects how our sensorism work. So at the same time, flavor requires the two senses to activate. Does it mean that what we said really directly reflects how we feel? So also, does it make sense that it is because some say that it's hard to find a rich expression for expressing flavor? So is it because our capability of explaining flavor is limited? So we fail to do this expression? I will center my research questions on basic three questions. The first is, how is cross-modality of perceptions presented in flavor expression? And compared to previous research, what made my data about flavor expression differ? Or is there other things that stays the same with the cross-modal researchers? And what are the functions? Why we use it? Why we express flavor cross-modally? Why we just say it? So that's my data. I took coffee cupping notes as my data, and coffee cupping is a professional practice of evaluating coffee flavor. It is done by coffee tasters that it requires a more explicit and direct preparation on the tested element, that is the coffee, before we make the we render how this coffee should be more floral, coffee to be more fruit. So they have this kind of professional evaluation. So in this coffee cupping process, the tasters measure flavor from brew coffee by the fragrance, gustatory feelings, the tactile quality, along with a list of standards. For example, here the coffee taster's flavor wheel. They will try to place the flavor onto this wheel, or they will just invent another one. Actually, a lot of process involved in this coffee cupping procedure, but since I only want to understand how the flavor expression is expressed, so in this part I will only analyze the linguistic phenomenon, how they talk about the flavor. So when they do the taste the flavor, for the tasters assess the taste, they will just simply take a spoonful of coffee and then forcefully, very quickly slurp the liquid to the mouth and disperse it in the mouth evenly, allowing it to touch all the tongues, the taste buds. Yes, and then they will talk about how it feels. So I collected my data recorded from 45 Taiwanese coffee tasters, and totally 45 samples of coffee are evaluated. All the tasters participating in this cupping event are held from March to June 2016. And totally 10 hours cupping practices are recorded and I manually transcribe it into about 30,000 words, Chinese words. And then I will share about my finding. Basically, the cross-modal metaphor or synesthetic metaphor that I found out within my data, and as well as synthetic similes that I want to discuss with you. We will talk about the meaning and regulation of this cross-modal metaphor in previous studies first, and then we compare with what I found. According to Stephen Woolman, 1959, he proposed that actually mainly the 5 perceptions builds the 5 categories of human senses. And there is a hierarchical directionality from the low to the high. So see from this figure, the properties possessed by the lower senses, which is actually located on the left of the hierarchy, the touch or the taste, should preferentially served in the source domain. At the same time, the property of higher senses, that is on the right of the hierarchy, are favored in the target domain. What does it mean? It means that the description we use more from the higher hierarchy. The color is usually can also expressed in the feeling of touch or taste, these perceptions. This observation was called panchronistic tendency. Seems he showed the lowest levels of sense having the last vocabulary in cross-modal mappings. Also, Shen, 1997, also points out that so according to what Woolman has proposed, actually there's only one direction. It's like unidirectional tendency of synesthetic metaphors from the high senses to the low senses. But Williams later posed another order. He thinks that rather than thinking about it as a linear directionality, they should be more complicated. He made a more differentiated claim of directionality by breaking the sense of sight into 2 subcategories. We can see from the light, the sight is going becoming the color one and the dimension. So what about in my findings? In my findings, it turns out that there's a mapping from sight, the visual perception in the source domain to express the feeling of smell. We can see from this example, in tasting Americano, it has a bright floral aroma and then it will have a bit flavor of rubber of glue. We see the bright floral aroma expression here. Actually, we mapped the depicting of the brightness to the flavor, to our flavor feeling. So in Chinese, the word bright, 明亮, actually has more than what is said about the visual. It has a little bit things about the emotion, the delightfulness. That means when you taste the flavor, there's a pleasant lingering sensation detected in the taster's mouth through the perception, and he think that is actually lighter and brighter. So in other way, there's a emotional, the pleasure is a reason in smelling, that he can actually smell the light. So we give the metaphor called smell is light. The other one can be also detected is there's a mapping from sight in the source domain to express taste. So when talking about a taste like sourness, acidity, the synesthetic metaphor allows a certain degree of intensity of brightness to be equivalent with that in sourness. So from this example, it said the example on the top, after adding sugar, its sourness can lighten up the sweetness of the sugar. So besides obtaining the property of light, in this metaphor, the sourness can serve as an agent, giving light to the patient, that is the sweetness. Again, we see from the example below. And then in tasting Vietnam Arabica coffee, we taste some bitterness in the middle, and the bitterness is enlarged in the flavor. There's a dimensional property of the flavor that we use, and we said that the flavor actually enlarged, become bigger. Also, another metaphor concerning with talking about taste with using the words in sound. We use the expression of timbre, like the low intensified sourness can be corresponded with low toned in timbre, in pitch. So accordingly, I propose a directionality of cross-modal mappings in describing the flavor from coffee. Notice that since it is a directional tendency of synesthetic expression in flavor, the taste and the smell are necessary acting as target domains rather than others. So here I just simply focus on flavor as a target domain and how other expression can we use. Secondly, instead of classifying this into 5 categories as the previous study shows, I only categorized them into 4 categories. The reason is because as we said, in describing flavor, taste and smell cannot be separated. Only because I'm only talking about the moment when they taste. So they involve the feeling both in their nasal and the oral capacities at the same time. So it's inseparable. So I put them into the same perception, or like the same category. So also like when we talk about the touch perception, I put more subcategories such as the texture, weight, and the humidity that's concerning with how we feel when we touch something or something is touched. And next one, and also in this figure, we can find out that actually capital words and the small letter words. For the capital words, it stands for the basic perceptions and the 5 perceptions we have. And at the same time, the small letter words represent the subtypes of the basic one. We can see that actually we don't categorize the perceptions from different capital words, like taste and smell actually belong to the same categories here. And we should note that because flavor is a combined percept of smell, so it is not a subtype, but actually a unified sensation. Okay. So next, I'll go quickly about how other things show besides synesthetic metaphor. Now we consider this expression. Espresso has a similar flavor with the sourness of grape wine. That sourness is very aggressive, and it has its unique personality, as if making the tongues to fight with it. The espresso tasted like a right-wing radical. What is it said? Okay, so how do we realize the synesthetic relationship in this kind of similes? And what is a suitable mechanism we can analyze? We certainly cannot just use the cross-modal metaphor because there are so many perceptions within it. So I've just move really back, like previously, to how we thinks about the cognitive language cognitively. When you talk about simile, a simile does not require a non-standard meaning in either domain or an extended construal as metaphor does, but an explicit comparison between two concepts or entities or even event properties is to be expected. So I choose the most primitive mechanism from cognitive linguistics, the prototype effect, and the image schema to manage this kind of cross-modal similes. So when talk about prototype, actually this is degrees of centrality that we first come up when think about a certain idea. We think about like when we think about the idea of birds, you will think about robin or sparrow, but you will never think about penguin as the most representative target for that idea. So that is the level of being representative. When it comes to my example, when describing the quality of the smoke in a coffee, you cannot just say that you can say that the coffee tastes like a smoke, but it's like very plain. But what you want to add the more flavor or more expression about how the smell really look like. Tasters often refers to tobacco or tobacco related entities for this analogy. So in this example, the idea's concept to be defined is the quality of smoke, but there's a vagueness of meaning the smoke from the coffee. So the tasters find that actually just say that there's smoke like a smoke from the tobacco pipe. It will be more precisely than we just say there's a smoke. In the other example, we can also use something symbolize the smoke. For example, rather than tobacco-like, there can be cigarette-like, or like a ashtray here is also something related to cigarette. So the expression are more prototypical in describing the sense of smoke rather than just saying that, oh, this is a smoke from the coffee. And when we talked about this kind of prototype, the cross modality, how does it work is like we talked about some image and we really have this kind of image in our mind. It is like the visualization of the prototypical entity that transfers the target flavor into more like a visual perception in our mind. But the visualized entity is also the prototypical entity rather than the coffee itself. So in other words, the speaker tastes the coffee and as if really seeing a visual image of a certain object which obtains prototypical flavor to his idea concept. So the speaker cued the image of the elder's tobacco pipe to recall its flavor of the smoke. And in fact, actually, when we are thinking about something, the image always shows firstly. So it somehow reflects people's reference to think visually. On the other hand, while the prototype effect concerns about the gradients of classification, when it comes to more complicated events, maybe this image schema can focus on more like the experimental schematic structures. Because of the image schema, we can do more abstract or mental scenario mappings when doing this kind of simile. So these are some literature review about what this image schema is, but it's mostly connected to our bodily experience. So we take this example. As we taste this coffee, we put the drink into our mouth and sense the gustatory feeling on the tongue. Because the feeling is on the tongue, we have to put the drink with a complex flavor on it when we perceive perceive it. As a result, there is a suffix schema that for the tongue to be like a surface and the flavor to be like a concrete entity to put onto it. So in this example, the pungent flavors stinging on one's tongue is analogized as a brazen lady dancing on the perceptual surface. So we have the two surface schema mapped together. Also, the foremost function of this kind of simile is to create a scenario which broadens the target's concept to be a little bit abstract. However, when doing this kind of cross-modal mapping, it really highly dependent on the personal experience, because everybody has different experience how on the content what the speaker said. So when they talk about there is a Brazilian lady dancing on the town, maybe some will have a visual image that pops out. There's actually a Brazilian lady, but some maybe will have an auditory image of the samba songs from the Brazilian, and other one maybe you have the feeling of dancing because they know how to dance in samba. So in terms of this cross-modal interaction, it's actually more vague and more abstract that everybody, every listener has their own image about what they think about this simile. So in fact, when talking about simile, it is not only the one-to-one perceptual mapping, but other than the one-to-more perceptual mappings. So that's all this about why we use this cross modality in language, and we'll come to the conclusion. Basically, there are two functions that when people talks about one perceptual feelings by using another perceptual descriptions. Firstly is the perceptual comprehending. Although in more cross-modal metaphor, when talking about that sourness and brightness are actually, we can feel the thing about the brightness corresponded to sourness. There's no obvious indicates of how sour it is, but we find that actually it is perceptibly comprehensible that we say that something is bright sourness, because they have this kind of perceived relative we used to link from intensity. So we connected the quality of sourness with the scale, with the brightness of the light, and then with the emotion we have for the brightness, and carry on. And also the quality of the sourness can match with the scale of dimension, or also like the low tone sourness is a timbre of sound. So basically we understand one perception through other perception. The other thing is more about emotion. And mainly two pathways of both human cognition and emotion are involved. One is talking about the synchronic pathway, and the other talks about the adjacent pathway. The synchronic pathway talks about that when we taste the coffee, actually simultaneously a lot of feelings come together. So we have this the touch, the tactile feeling, the taste feeling, the smell feeling at the same time when we just have the cup of coffee. And then the adjacent pathway is actually talking about something happened before or after the event. So it may involve some expectations that we thought about coffee, or like the emotions that after we have a coffee, maybe we consider it related to something that we have already tried other flavor. So rather than link with intensity, this is more like linking with positivity or negativity, or the emotion that we have about the thing. So the quality of the taste can have, because we have some expression or we have some feeling afterwards, you have been connected with the happiness, or it can be a pleasure or other emotion. So here's my conclusion. For the 3 questions I have, the first one is, how is cross-modality of perceptions presented in flavor expressions? Well, it turns out that through synesthetic metaphor and synesthetic simile, and we can understand how cross-modality is presented. And when talking about similes, it is based on the conceptual structure such as prototype, effect, and image schemas. And the second one, what made the data about flavor expression differ with previous studies? I make another categorization from 5 categories to 4 categories, and more subtypes of perception are involved. And talking about directionality, because only the flavor is in the target domain, so the directionality is all about flavor. But why using it? Why we always say something from the other perception? We don't just use it. I think the main point is we want to communicate our feelings not only cognitively, but also perceptually and emotionally. That is, in truth, when the speaker wants to talk about how they feel, they not only want to tell you about the knowledge about the coffee because it is really abstract. They also want you to understand how they really feel at the same time, and how they can, how emotion can arouse afterwards or precedes. So in truth, the comprehension of cross-modal association, or we say synesthetic association, typically requires audience to understand both cognitive and perceptive contents, and also the speaker's emotions. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And it's time for a discussion, for questions. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
That's very interesting data. I just wanted to ask whether you think orientational metaphor is at all at work in your first metaphor.
The first metaphor?
Yeah, because
Okay.
I think I saw an expression which you...
Yeah, okay.
It's
No.
where you talked about smell is light. Yes. I
Yes.
think so. No. Next one.
Mm-hmm.
Aha. Yeah. You have an expression of 提亮, which you
Yeah.
translate as lighten up.
Yes.
So I was kind of thinking maybe there is an orientational metaphor, good as up or happy as up there.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Actually, because I translate the word for 提亮, make it lighter, just for the quality of lightness. But actually, yes, I agree that there's something about happiness within it, and when you lighten up, there actually a dimension from the low to the high. So also it has the pleasure feeling, the emotional feeling that happy is of. So that's also the orientational metaphor within this. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Some other questions? So, what about our coffee in here? I don't like. I'm
There's
not.
another. Thank you.
So you talked about cross-modal mappings in Mandarin, and I think we recognize from many other languages that similar kinds of things, how cross-modal mappings are involved in flavor descriptions and evaluations. So I was wondering, do you think that there is a cross-linguistic generally processes going on? Is this kind of mapping specific to the domain of flavor? Is that happening everywhere, do you think, or are there cultures, languages that have systems for talking about flavors in a in a modality specific way that is not dependent on metaphorical mappings from other languages, from other domains?
Actually, rather than talk about other languages, I just found out actually when I transcribe the data, the lightness of a sourness, like we use as a bright sour, is actually seen very seldom in Chinese. We only use it in talking about coffee cupping, or like in tea, evaluation tea, or like other fruit when we do the assessment of it. But in daily talking, actually less people use this sour is really bright. Yes, so I'm still thinking, is that because about will it happen only in coffee, like maybe in the coffee, because it's not only shown in Taiwan, maybe in European country or in other Asian country, they will use this lightness to map with the sourness. I think maybe there's a tradition, but I'm not sure.
What I was actually specifically thinking of was some research by Asifa Majid that you may or may not be familiar with, but she has studied. They're rare, but they do exist according to her results. So she's gone out in the field in Malaysia, Malay and some other Southern Eastern Asian areas, finding several languages and cultures that have systems of descriptions for flavors independently of cross-modal mapping. So just like we in the kind of languages that at least in the West that we're familiar with, we always have to invoke metaphors. And actually people do that quite generally. If you ask them to describe a smell, they often make similes. So this smells like coconut, or smells like soap, or that sort of thing. So a very explicit comparison making with this lexical stuff for the olfactory domain completely lacking. But there are languages that have that for the olfactory domain in exactly the same way as we have it for the vision domain or the acoustic domain. Yeah. So it would be interesting to compare
how it happens. Yeah.
That would be interesting to have a look.
Yes. Thank you.
Some other questions? If there are not, thank you again.